Death by a Thousand Cuts, the multi-front vampire attack on USD hegemony. A quiet but relentless contest is unfolding beneath the global monetary surface, where China, BRICS nations, outside money assets, non-dollar payment rails, and shifting reserve preferences are draining the US dollar's dominance through a series of small but cumulative vampire attacks. At the same time, the United States is deploying its own countermeasures, stablecoins, ETF wrappers, chip embargoes, and regulatory containment, to slow, redirect, or neutralize these pressures. The result is a slow-motion struggle for monetary gravity, defined not by a single decisive blow, but by attrition, competition, and strategic adaptation on every front. Section 1, Introduction. A slow-motion monetary war. For decades, the US dollar has been the gravitational center of global finance, not because it is perfect or invulnerable, but because the architecture around it, including energy pricing, debt markets, capital flows, and financial infrastructure, has been strong enough to keep the world in its orbit. That architecture is no longer uncontested. A vampire attack, in crypto terminology, describes the process by which a new protocol silently siphons users, liquidity, and economic energy from an incumbent by offering superior incentives. Applied to geopolitics, the analogy becomes even more powerful. Rival nations and alternative systems do not attack the dollar directly. They drain it, quietly, gradually, and from many directions at once. The contest is not explosive. It is erosive. It is not a coup. It is attrition. It is not a single strike. It is death by 1,000 cuts. Section 2. The legacy architecture of USD hegemony. The dollar's global dominance was never simply a matter of preference. It was engineered through three interlocking pillars that shaped global economic behavior for decades. Pillar 1, the petrodollar system. Beginning in the 1970s, global oil was priced exclusively in US dollars, forcing every country, ally or rival, to hold dollars to purchase energy. This created structural demand that became self-reinforcing. Pillar 2, US Treasuries as the world's reserve asset. Countries running trade surpluses, Japan, China, and petrostates, parked their savings in U.S. treasuries. This kept U.S. borrowing costs low and embedded U.S. dollar assets at the center of global safety and liquidity. Pillar 3, U.S. equities as a global store of value. When foreign sovereign wealth funds and institutional investors sought returns, they turned to U.S. capital markets, particularly blue chip and technology stocks. The U.S. stock market became the third artery carrying global money into U.S. dollar-denominated assets. These pillars reinforced each other. Energy priced in dollars created demand for dollars. Dollars accumulated through trade were recycled into treasuries. And surplus capital seeking returns found its way into U.S. equities. For nearly half a century, this created a closed loop, a monetary flywheel powering American hegemony. That flywheel is now being slowly drained. Section 3, the multi-front vampire attacks, external drains. None of the attacks are fatal on their own, but together they siphon demand, influence, and structural necessity away from the dollar. Subsection 1, the erosion of the petrodollar. Saudi Arabia now sells oil to China in yuan. Russia sells energy to India in rupees, dirhams, and yuan. BRICS plus nations are building commodity settlement systems that bypass the dollar entirely. Every transaction executed outside the US dollar weakens the network effect that once made the dollar unavoidable. It is the first slow leak in a long-sealed vessel. Subsection 2, the decline in global treasury accumulation. Foreign nations are no longer recycling surpluses into US treasuries with the same enthusiasm. Instead, they are buying gold, and not small amounts. Central banks worldwide are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in 70 years. Gold is neutral. Gold has no counterparty. Gold is outside the U.S. system. Every ounce added to a central bank's balance sheet is a unit of demand not flowing into treasuries. This is not rebellion. It is self-defense. Subsection 3, the threat to U.S. tech dominance. The U.S. stock market, pillar number 3, is more concentrated than at any point in its history. The so-called Magnificent Seven are responsible for a disproportionate share of U.S. market performance and global investor inflows. But China is rapidly catching up in the very fields that underpin U.S. tech valuations. Artificial intelligence, robotics, electric vehicles, data centers, battery technology, and industrial automation. China has more AI engineers than the rest of the world combined, cheaper energy, abundant electricity, a larger consumer base, and a government willing to subsidize strategic industries indefinitely. If China erodes U.S. technological superiority, then foreign inflows into U.S. equities weaken, and with them, one of the last strong pillars of U.S. dollar hegemony. Subsection 4. Local currency trade settlement systems. New payment networks are emerging, including mBridge, PAPS, BRICS Pay, and local currency swaps, along with bilateral foreign exchange arrangements bypassing the dollar. These systems do not replace the dollar outright. They make it optional. Optionality is the enemy of hegemony. A monopoly loses power the moment alternatives exist. Subsection 5. Outside money as alternatives. The purest vampire attacks on the dollar come from assets that sit entirely outside the U.S. financial perimeter: self-custodied Bitcoin, physical gold, and global decentralized finance that settles and yields outside banks. These assets compete directly with U.S. treasuries as stores of value. They are sovereignless, they are permissionless, they cannot be sanctioned or frozen. For nations wary of U.S. financial pressure, outside money is the first true escape hatch in decades. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 4. The U.S. countermeasures internal reinforcers. The United States is not a passive actor in this contest. Washington, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley are deploying sophisticated counterattacks designed to redirect, absorb, or defang the vampire drains. These are not loud, headline policies. They are architectural responses meant to stabilize the dollar's gravitational pull. Subsection 1. Stablecoins as dollar expansion vehicles. USDT and USDC do not weaken the dollar. They weaken other currencies. They are offshore dollars, not domestic dollars. They are fully backed by U.S. treasuries. They function as synthetic eurodollars. They are dollar rails embedded in foreign economies. When citizens in Nigeria, Ghana, Argentina, Turkey, or Lebanon switch from their local currency to USDT, they are not escaping the dollar. They are entering it. Stablecoins drain local savings, foreign exchange reserves, domestic credit, and monetary sovereignty from emerging markets, and funnel global capital into the short-term U.S. Treasury market. This is America's fintech counterattack against foreign de-dollarization. Subsection 2. ETF wrappers as neutralizers of outside money. Bitcoin and gold are true outside money threats, but Bitcoin ETFs and gold ETFs are not. ETF wrappers force all inflows and outflows to settle in dollars. You buy the ETF with dollars, you sell the ETF into dollars. All trading happens inside U.S. financial rails. Custodians control the underlying, holders control nothing. The ETF structure converts a vampire attack into a dollar-reinforcing instrument. Convenience becomes the U.S. defensive perimeter. No key management, no vault security, no bearer risk, and one-click exposure via a brokerage account. Millions will choose convenience over sovereignty, and that keeps the dollar at the center. Subsection 3. Technological containment. Semiconductor embargoes. To prevent China from overtaking U.S. AI and robotics capabilities, the U.S. restricts access to NVIDIA 100, H100, and H200 GPUs, AMD MI300 chips, advanced semiconductor manufacturing tools, and high-end data center hardware. This is not a chip policy. It is a monetary defense policy. If China surpasses the United States in artificial intelligence, technology stocks fall, global capital exits U.S. equities, pillar number 3 collapses, and dollar demand drops. Chip embargoes are a strategic countermeasure to protect the final pillar of U.S. dollar hegemony, technology-fueled capital inflows. Subsection 4. Regulatory and institutional defenses. The United States uses its control over global clearing, global custody, global settlement, offshore dollar access, and sanctions and compliance frameworks to ensure that even non-U.S. financial activity often touches U.S. dollar rails. This institutional moat is the invisible wall around the dollar system. Section 5. The dynamic balance. Attrition, counterattack, and global realignment. What emerges from this landscape is not a clean narrative of decline or a triumphant assertion of U.S. supremacy. Instead, the world finds itself in a state of persistent monetary duality, a competition defined by incremental losses and incremental defenses. Neither side can win quickly. Neither side can dominate absolutely. China, BRICS, and the outside money systems have no interest in destroying the U.S. dollar outright. Doing so would risk collapsing global trade, destabilizing commodity markets, and undermining their own export bases. Their goal is diversification, insulation, and optionality, a world where the dollar is one of several anchors rather than the only one. The United States, for its part, cannot prevent the emergence of alternatives, but it can slow them, shape them, redirect them, and where possible, absorb them back into the dollar's gravitational field. This produces a global equilibrium defined by continuous external drains, meaning vampire attacks, and continuous internal reinforcers, meaning U.S. countermeasures. The dollar loses influence at the margins, but entrenches itself through new technologies, new rails, and new forms of offshore demand. It bleeds, yet it replenishes. This is not the end of dollar hegemony. It is the end of its monopoly. And in that shift lies the real story. Section 6. Forward Scenarios, 2025 through 2035. The next decade will not deliver a binary outcome. Instead, several plausible trajectories emerge, depending on how aggressively each side pushes its advantage. These scenarios are not mutually exclusive. The real world may contain elements of all of them. Scenario A, managed decay. U.S. countermeasures hold. In this world, stablecoins proliferate. Bitcoin ETFs and gold ETFs absorb speculative and store of value flows, and chip restrictions slow China's technological ascent just enough to preserve U.S. equity strength. Global de-dollarization continues, but at a controlled pace. The dollar remains dominant, but no longer uncontested. This is the slow landing of hegemony. Scenario B, BRICS coordination intensifies. In this scenario, China and BRICS produce deeper commodity settlement systems, expand Embridge, and accelerate yuan-based trade. Gold becomes a more explicit settlement layer. Outside money systems like Bitcoin and decentralized finance gain traction among politically misaligned or sanction-prone nations. The dollar loses structural demand faster than the United States can reinforce it. This is accelerated multipolarity. Scenario C, technological displacement of U.S. equities. If China surpasses the United States in artificial intelligence, robotics, battery systems, and industrial automation, global capital may gradually shift toward Asian markets or into neutral assets. The Magnificent Seven lose their monopoly on global growth narratives. The third pillar weakens. Dollar hegemony becomes vulnerable at its deepest point. This is the technological inversion scenario, one of the most dangerous for U.S. monetary power. Scenario D, dollar reentrenchment via stablecoin dominance. A more aggressive U.S. approach, treating stablecoins as geopolitical tools, could produce a world where USDC becomes the global settlement standard, USDT continues to dollarize emerging markets, Eurodollar liquidity is displaced by what we might call stable dollar liquidity, and the United States captures the offshore market through regulated fintech and exchange integrations. If stablecoins reach global mass adoption, the dollar could regain momentum by tapping markets unreachable by traditional finance. This is the Eurodollar version 2.0 re-weaponization of U.S. money. Section 7. Conclusion. Monetary gravity in a fragmenting world. The contest over global money is no longer a narrative of triumph versus collapse. It is a subtle, structural tension between centers of power, each capable of draining or reinforcing the other, each shaping incentives, infrastructure, and flows. The U.S. dollar is not falling off a cliff. It is being eroded, slowly, quietly, and from many directions at once. Yet the United States is not defenseless. Its countermeasures, stablecoins, ETFs, chip embargoes, and deep institutional moats are sophisticated and adaptive, enabling the dollar to reabsorb some of the very forces designed to weaken it. The future is neither unipolar nor post-American. It is multipolar, defined by competing payment systems, competing stores of value, and competing technological centers, each exerting its own gravitational pull. In this world, U.S. dollar hegemony does not vanish, it becomes contested. And the true battle is not fought in headlines or summits, but in liquidity flows, settlement rails, chip supply chains, and the quiet architecture of global finance. This is not a war of shock. It is a war of attrition, a war of incentives, a war of systems, a war in which empires do not fall. They are bled. Death by 1,000 cuts.